Welcome to the Creative Play and Podcast Network. Join us as we share our favorite RPGs, one-shot games, tabletop games, reviews, and convention panels. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Kelly, aka Trixie from Ragnarok and Roll, assigned to Ragnarok Story, and Tilda Wimblewick from D&D Journey of the 5th Edition. First off, I would just like to say thank you to everyone for listening to our varied adventures, as well as for rating us on iTunes and RPGpodcast.com. If you haven't rated us yet, we would greatly appreciate it if you could. And if you're looking for more ways to support our efforts, we are now on Patreon, a great site where you can help us continue making more podcasts, as well as some special surprises for our patrons. If you can, please look us up at www.patreon.com/cppn. Every little bit helps. And again, thank you for listening.
Welcome to Getting to Know Your Characters, which we assume will be a discussion about writing in some manner. You want to start? Introduce yourself.
Thomas Watson, write mostly science fiction, some fantasy. Was in a panel earlier today about killing characters. So this has been kind of a surreal day for me. I feel like I'm running backwards here or something. But yeah, mostly science fiction, a little fantasy, and one book that's not really about the dog. There's a few of you in here who really get tired of hearing that joke, I'm sure.
And I'm Catherine Wells. I write mostly science fiction, a little fantasy, and I have one historical novel out. And new book I'm pushing now, Crystal Desert, which is the continuation of Aztec Eagle that came out last year.
Hello, my name is William Herr. I'm not very important. I am a D-list celebrity at best. Yet they keep on inviting me back and giving me a free beer if I'll sit on panels and talk about things I know nothing about. I am a playwright, poet, screenwriter, author, former journalist with the NUJ. 5:30 return. Jay, come on in.
He was in the wrong panel room.
I think you scared him off. Can't imagine.
So anyways, 5:30 Return was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. That and $2 will buy you a cheap cup of coffee. From a Broken Land was a finalist for Book of the Year on the year it was released. I think it was 2017. And that and $2 will buy you a cheap cup of coffee. The Collective was an international bestseller and caused riots in India. That and $2 will buy you a cheap cup of coffee. I am nothing like Tom Watson. Tom Watson makes a living off of his writing.
Well, no funny ears. It's too late for that, sorry.
Tom Watson makes a living off of his writing. I make less than $5 grand off my writing. Okay, in fact, I make less than about $500 a year from my writing.
There's money involved in this?
Everybody will want to do it.
So easy.
At any rate, so I have my methods to do things, and some people think that I'm good at them, and a lot of people think that I'm not at them, and that's what makes me a D-list celebrity. At best, and only in Tucson.
And on the end we have...
Oh, hi, I'm Jay Smith. I'm sorry I'm late. It was a fascinating conversation about LGBTQ issues next door, and the door was locked, so. I'm a podcaster, primarily I'm an audio drama producer and writer. I've written a couple of novels. I have a master's degree in fine arts and fiction writing. A lot of my time is talking to aspiring writers and telling them what not to do and helping them find their path. So I'm happy to be here.
Okay. So, in getting to know your characters, well, why don't we just start down at the end with Jay. Jay, what do you do to get to know your characters?
Wow.
That's what you get for coming in late.
Okay.
Roll the ball in your lap.
That's That's fair. I do the same to my students. I will fall in love with one aspect of a character, and I will explore from there. I will find a vehicle for a character that I like, but I will have to. I'm an old gamer. I used to play D&D, Call of Cthulhu, and all those things. So anyone who's played those games know that a character generation is key to developing out your character, and that character is going to evolve over the games, and it's going to evolve over your story. So the same principle applies. I will create a character that I think on the surface, superficial, is I like this character, and then I ask the question, what do they want? And from there, I just say, okay, where did they come from? Why do they want this? And then extrapolate it out. Now, who's in the way of this objective? So I create another character. And then I start with a roster. If I'm going to create a sports team, who will be the supporting characters for this main character and why are they there? And it just becomes a game. You create a character sheet, basically. It doesn't have to be, the statistics don't have to be there, but one of my students just seem to come to class, they have basically a generic character sheet of physical, mental traits down to favorite color. Whatever they feel is allows them to see the character vividly in their eyes. It may not even be relevant to your story, but as a writer, it starts to infuse a sense of authenticity of that character because you know them, they're real to you, and then that translates directly to your writing. It's like writing about a family member or a friend because there's a sincerity and realism to it. That's how I start.
I start out by offering them a free beer. I am what somebody earlier today was referring to as an exploratory writer. Discovery writing is another term for it. And
he's a
I'm sorry,
character.
this is why. Okay, I get it. Okay, why he has to do it. What happens with me for character development is nothing nearly as analytical. Is that I start imagining the story. Well, there's going to be people in it because my fiction tends to be character driven. And it very literally will start out with there's going to be a man that does something, there's a female character that interacts, and this happens. And at some point, their identities start to evolve as I'm telling the story. And so I will get dialogue coming out of them, which defines their personalities. And it's a very much a partly subconscious process in which I am trying to think, okay, would this make sense that this guy says something like this in this context? And if he does, that tells me something about who he is because he's reacting. I look at the situation, how would a person react to this situation? So at no point do I don't make lists or anything like that. It just sort of starts to roll. And I end up with a rough draft in which most of the characters have names, not all of them. Frequently it's just the guy with dark hair or something. I've got personal designation. I get through the very first draft, which, to call it a rough draft would be a horrifying understatement. And then I go through and figure out who these people really are and whether or not they fit these roles or if I have to move something around. I get through that second pass, now I've got characters. And again, at this point, they're real people. I understand their motives because I've created a situation that motivates them. And there's a feedback that happens. It's the best way I can describe it. It's a messy process. I know people that get the same amount of work done half the time I do. When I try to formalize it, or worse, outline things, it just goes up in smoke. I can't do it.
Yeah, I also kind of explore before I do it mostly before I sit down and start writing, not entirely. But I like to go hiking. And when I'm hiking and my body's busy doing things and my mind is free to just spin, and, I let my characters talk to each other. What do they say? How do they react? What are the relationships? I like to say I put the two characters in a room and let them talk to each other. So I get kind of a general sense of the characters. And then I start writing, and then they will evolve as I write, and sometimes I have to go back to the beginnings. Oh, wait, gotta and change this and add this other scene in here because what do you know, this happened to that character and it's going to affect down there, so but it's very much very fluid in terms of finding the character and having it come together.
Okay, I guess I'm a bit of a freak. Jay already knows what my process is and how insane it is.
Yeah, you're free.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, when I decided I was going to start writing fiction, I had no intention of writing fiction before that, right? And I said, okay, there has to be a process that I can go through, okay, to ensure that my characters are engaging and have development. And I hooked up with a guy by the name of David Freeman, who teaches screenwriting, and he has a process for developing screenwriting characters. And I adapted that process to writing books, and it worked very well for me. But now I can't do it any other way. Every main character has, at minimum, 2 strengths and 2 flaws. And at the beginning of the story, they are in stasis. They balance each other up. I call it a character diamond, but it could be a character quadrangle or whatever, whatever you want, or just a character star. Now, the thing is that they have these things that they're strong at, they have these things that they're weak at, but they're okay with themselves as they are. They've learned how to live with their weaknesses and how to maximize their strengths, and then something happens, and it goes out of stasis, and now they're imbalanced. Now they can't rebalance themselves without interacting with one or more other people who have strengths that counter their weaknesses. And those characters have multiple strengths and multiple weaknesses. And what I end up doing is I end up putting them on 3x5 cards, and then I block out all the scenes, and every scene has to either advance the plot or advance the character development, or best, do both simultaneously. Okay, so that they're talking while the action is going on, and it's not people in rooms talking interspersed with action. Okay, which I have people yell at me about. And that's how I do it, and it takes me weeks to get everything laid out, but once it's laid out, I start typing. I know what every character is going to do, and I've got the 3x5 cards. Okay, I'm on this scene. It's this one, and this one. Okay, yeah, okay. And I type out all the dialogue, and then I type out the action in between the dialogue, and I move on to the next. And it's a disgorgement process that takes me very little time to write because I've already written everything up here. I also outline the hell out of everything, and if I stray from the outline, I get writer's block, and I have to leave a chapter. So,
I generally do an outline, but it's more plot. It doesn't have character development in it. That comes as I work with the characters and as I put them in situations and how do they react. And it sounds a little woo, but they really kind of take on their own personality, and sometimes they surprise me. I'm like, I didn't know that character felt that way about that until, I don't quite know how to explain it. It's not logical, but it grows out of the situation and the people and the dialogue exchange.
Well, I made a brief comment. This comes from a panel we had this morning. Sharon Skinner was in here talking about themes in fiction. And somewhere in the conversation, something in exchange we had was revealed the fact that for a lot of us, this is about 20% conscious effort and about 80% going in the back of your brain that you're not entirely, which just gives you, you hear writers say things about the characters talking to them or telling them how something's going to happen. What that really is all about is, well, we're not necessarily not schizophrenic, but the stuff in the back of your head is working while you're focused on something else, even if it's the project you're writing. And the characters are developing, kind of simmering in the back burner until you need them. And when you bring this material into the conscious, there's more to it than you expected. Mm-hmm. And I frequently am surprised by where a character goes. I'm usually pleased by it, thinking, wow, okay, this is really going to work cool. I'm going to go with this. But it wasn't there. It wasn't something I plotted or decided the day before or an hour before. It was just suddenly there. And it works usually it works at that moment. Now, there are times when I'm going through the revisions and realizing I'm barking up the wrong tree, and this is not good. But that's why you have revisions.
When I wrote from a Broken Land, I wrote the first 5 chapters, and I realized, you know what? I don't need any of these chapters. And so I had to delete all 5 chapters and start over from right that point. I said, okay, you know what? No, we're just going to start in the middle of the action when things get good. We're not going to have any lead up.
Yep.
So a week of work.
I had the opposite experience with the book that follows this one, which has not been released yet, where I realized I'd started at about 5 chapters too late.
Oh,
So I got to the very end of it and realized where the book was going and realized I had not set this up. This is where the story has to be. This is what these characters are going to be, who they're going to be. But there's nothing at the beginning of the draft that makes this make sense. So I had to go back and literally write a new beginning to it. It turned out to be 4 chapters. I've never done that before. It was kind of a shock to the system. It's like, hey,
I will say that I quite often have to go back and lay in shotguns, if you understand what I mean by shotgun on the mantle. Shotgun on the mantle, where something's going to be necessary at the end. Okay, and so I have to go back and I have to integrate it into the character who's going to use it at the beginning. Okay, and then leave it like that. I quite often have to do that. Joanne tells me, "Did you put all the shotguns back?" And I'm like, "No, I missed this one and this one. Thank you, honey."
One of my things is, my background in performing arts, collaborative theater, one of the great exercises that I've tried to develop is taking everybody out of the script, everything out of the story. If I have a problem with how the characters connecting, I put them in a room together and I have them talk. I will have a table read for my characters. I'm used to having a table read for my actors, and a lot of creative things come out when you're collaborating with actors. When I get the characters talking to each other, the same kind of thing happens. So it's kind of like that moment in any Bond film where Bond is finally face to face with the villain and things happen, he reveals the plot. Getting the protagonist and the antagonist and supporting characters just posturing against each other like a West Side Story musical, just kind of talking about their goals, often generates new ideas and finds aspects of those characters that when you're in the moment of the scene, you're thinking about where am I, what am I smelling, what am I seeing? It takes you out of that conflict. Whereas if you take the time and you do the exercise with the characters in a room with nothing else, just white walls, have them talk, then you start to figure out what they really want. And then you take it back and say, well, that last 2 chapters, screw it, I got to get rid of those. Because their real meaning isn't really in that text.
Do you write that out when you say that you have them talk? Do you just type it out?
Yep. I've got volumes of never to be seen conversations. I might put them in a blog if I think it's clever. It's not clever. So.
What was that bit that you used to do? Was it the Citadel?
The Citadel Boys was a series that I wrote. It was just dialogue, and it was
every time somebody died, they joined the Citadel. So every time somebody famous died, they became a new character in the Citadel.
Basically, the premise was it was after Douglas Adams died, and he's a devout atheist. And the story originally was a concept of him arriving in an afterlife that was neither hell nor heaven, and he was the first people he meets, H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe, who are now best friends, and maybe a little more. And then just that conversation, and then I just added Jimmy Buffett to the conversation. And I'm just trying to figure out in their head, how would they interact as characters? What would they sound like? And that just, that Jimmy Buffett analog is going to end up in a story someday because I'm exploring his books and all that. But yeah, thank you.
One of the things that I did at one point where I was getting kind of stuck with my characters was I interviewed them. Which feels really weird because, of course, it's all in your head. But letting them talk to you in their voice, it lets you hear their voice, and you can ask them questions and demand that they give you the answers for what's motivating them, what their secrets are, why they're doing or not doing the things they're doing. And that turned out to be pretty productive exercise.
There's a wonderful play called 6 Characters in Search of an Author. And it's these characters that the author has created, and he hasn't been able to write the play for them. and they come to him and talk to him and basically force his hand and make him deal with them. And that's, I've had characters come and talk to me.
I've had something similar. What will happen is there's a dialogue exchange going on, or they're discussing a situation, and the characters will get into this very long-winded, detailed conversation. And I'll get done with it and realize if I leave this in there, people are just going to nod right off. But everything they've talked about, I needed to know.
Yes.
So I take the dialogue out, I turn it into something else, use the information some other way, and it still builds the characters. But my readers aren't going to suddenly go into a coma reading the stuff. And you'll hear writers say this in panels. There are things that I need to know when I'm telling the story. You guys don't need to know it, because it's going to be in the background, little bits of detail to sprinkle here and there. It doesn't need to be. But it literally come out as conversations between the characters. I have yet to have had myself inject into those things, like the director of the movie stepping in and saying, "What are you guys talking about?" It's never actually occurred to me to do that. Of course, now that the idea is in my head, it might happen.
I've found that I can't write about a character if I don't understand what they're going through. So I really do inject a lot of my own experiences. When I was 14 years old, I had already won the Young Authors Conference twice. Okay, I was thinking, I'm going to be a science fiction writer, and I'm going to write about this and these high adventures. And I suddenly said, one day I said, how the hell can I write about all these things when I haven't experienced a damn thing? Okay, so I need to go out and experience life, and that's when I started writing the radio. So, and gave my mother gray hairs, and my sister refused to go because she saw me get trampled by a bull and then get back up and go off and then go back in the next week. But it was the beginning of a lifelong love affair with danger and death, and it gives me a perspective that often my characters need to have. Okay, how do you face death if you can't face life? Or in 5:30 Return, what does addiction? What did my own struggles with addiction give me that I could give to Juan the Monster? And it worked out very well, and he was able to explain what's going on, and I was able to translate that across to that one kid, that one son of my one fan out in Wyoming, who gave the book to his kid, 12-year-old kid. I'm like, oh my God, you did what? I said, they've got nipple clamps in this thing. Okay, it's graphic. Okay, and he said, no. Now he understands why his mother left him and what the drugs were doing. We had a really good conversation. I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's okay, but. There's gratuitous sadism in the thing. Okay,
we're all part of probably the only profession that exists where you can have a heart attack and I've heard of somebody doing this, going through the paramedics are taking care of. He knows he's having a heart attack, and he's making mental notes of what's happening because he wants to remember this in case he ever writes a character who has a heart attack. And, you'll hear writers joke like this, a broken arm, I know what that feels like. I can put it in the book. It's all, experience is what, people say, where do you get your ideas? From everything. Everything that's ever happened to me.
Funny you bring that up. I wrote, my master's thesis was a book called Resurrection Pact, and the main character had just beat leukemia. And my brother had gone through it, so he was my primary source. Another friend of mine didn't make it. He went through a similar situation. I did a lot of research. I asked my characters how they felt, and I got good answers, I thought. Flash forward a couple of years, guess what? I have cancer. I had to go through that whole process. Now, with proximity to that, I'm rewriting that book. There's that emotion. My characters are now, Winston Casey, who I named after the two people in my life who went through it, is giving me much different answers now. That physical, even if you talk to somebody, when I talked to my brother, how did you feel? I understood it intellectually, but I didn't get it. I asked him after I wrote the book, did I get it? And he went, yeah. And then after he came to me after my surgery, he said, do you get it now? Yeah, I do. So there is a limit when you write your characters. You're going to have to fall back on the old writer's crutch of you're a professional liar. You have to either convincingly lie and let it go, recognize what you're just competent at lying about, and then go back and get more, and then recognize what you're throwing bullshit at. And then that's when you start to do your research.
Yeah. And in fact, sometimes the process is not cathartic. Sometimes the process is ridiculously painful. And only because Jay's talking about this, I'm reminded of the time when we were both in college. Jay drug me back from the edge of destruction. That's the only way I can say it. He saved my life. I was writing a play called Memorial in Green. And it was a play about a failed soldier who returns after war, okay, who blames himself for everything that has happened to all the people around himself. And his discussions with a memorial are part of that play, of a war memorial that's all green and top of that, green and corroded. And by the time I got to the middle of that, I was howling at the I was drunk all the time. I was in tears. I could not finish the damn play, and I never will. It'll kill me. But Jay's the one who's like, dude, we're going to pull your ass back, and we're going to go back to playing spades and chasing girls, And so I credit all of my work is actually Jay's fault. So because if I had completed that, because I was bound to determine I was going to complete it, but yeah, it's because I had been there. I had been a failure in the military, and I served my time and I got an honorable discharge. But the military and I both agreed that I had no business being in the military.
Someone who gave you orders, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
I never knew that. Well, thank you. Please continue. I'm sorry.
I'm done. You can make fun of me now.
Oh, I will.
Meanwhile, flying bush.
Any of you in the audience have thoughts about what you write?
Yes, ma'am.
You were talking about real experience versus acquired experience or researched experience. I kept thinking of Stephen Crane because he wrote his best book about war when he knew absolutely nothing about war. But then he got some experience of like open door or something, and that was actually inferior, or at least in terms of the eyes of the critics who look at his career. And so I'm wondering about how in the world are you about? Is this guy just a better liar?
No. Once you've experienced, how many people here have been rock climbers? Okay, so you understand what I say, what I mean when we're either of you free climbers. Okay, free climber. You were a free climber. I was a free climber. Okay.
Big walls.
Huh?
Big walls.
Yeah, big cliffs for me. And when you are climbing that wall or that cliff, you are not afraid. There's no fear, but you are so hyper-focused, okay, that nothing else exists. You can't lie about that. But if you try to explain it to somebody, you get wordy and it gets difficult. So you have to find a way to explain it without actually explaining it. That's what I found you have to do. If you're in combat, if you're in a war zone, having been in a war zone, you are not afraid. You are hyper-focused, and you are making sure that you're not making any mistakes, but you know that you might, and your next step might be your last. And you just accept that, and you move on, and it kills you afterwards, because afterwards is where you go, what the hell did I just do? What the hell did I just do? What the hell did I just do? But in the moment, not at all. Can you explain that? No. You have to find a way to work around it so that your audience knows what is happening, and you can convey that without actually telling them in some long, wordy, 12-paragraph diatribe on how it feels to be shot at by the guy this time.
A lot of it is analog. Horror writers, obviously, there are no vampires, there are no zombies.
No.
I try to convince people of that.
Point of order. My first published work was an interview with two people who were serial killers who believed themselves to be vampires.
We know this interview. The thing is that the point is that they're empty vessels for whatever you really feel, and it allows you to lie in a way that's relatable. The zombies represent something that people can relate to, even if it's not a specific experience or an activity. And zombies can mean any number of different things. The fact is that they're a catalyst for this real story about real people, but vampires end up representing addiction or some kind of, like in the 80s, vampires represented greed and avarice, and then they became really, really sexy, and it became a metaphor for LGBTQ issues, but whatever you apply to that. So in a way, when we write characters, we're telling you a different kind of story through a vessel that I may not relate to you with athletics or anything in that nature, but you tell me a story and that those traits are applied to a monster, I get it.
It's something I've realized, doing bits and pieces of it, is that the more diverse my own experiences are, the easier it is for me to imagine somebody else doing something I have not experienced, if that makes sense. I mean, as I've gotten older over the years and had more things happen to me and gotten myself into more things, it's easier to relate to and understand people who have different experiences, and to make sense, and then to incorporate that into the fiction I write, which of course leads you straight to characters that make more sense.
The accumulation of experiences helps you project into experiences you have had.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. It's easier to imagine something like that because...
But it kind of breaks down this idea of self that you have when things happen to you, and that's not how I imagined it would be.
Yeah.
And so you're like, okay, well, I made a mistake. If I could make that kind of mistake, you can make that kind of. I get it. I understand now why people, do things that to me like, well, that was really stupid. Why did they do that? Well, I did something that was really stupid, and I'm like, okay, it's easier than I thought it would be. So it as you accumulate more experiences, it just kind of opens you up, and it puts little pinholes in that screen that you have around yourself that kind of separates you from reality in a way, because you're just sure when you start out that it's maybe not a perfect world, but it's you have a particular vision of the world, and as things happen that jar that vision, that poke holes in it, then you become more receptive to things that are outside your experience, and I think are better able to relate to them and then incorporate them into your characters and your work.
I would interject that I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I would interject that you can't know everything about what your characters are going through. For instance, ask a 12-year-old boy to write a short story about sex. Okay? He might be exceptionally well read and know how everything works, and he'll have no clue. Okay, but he'll write some really, really, really bad erotica, and you'll end up with something that you can laugh at because, oh my God, yeah, I remember when I was that old too. But if you can find other aspects of your own experience that you can put into the character, you can skirt around the things that you don't know and just say, yes, and this is happening, but I was feeling this at this time, and I was feeling this at this time. That's a way to skirt, because none of us is I mean, one of my characters was a 17-year-old girl. I have never been a 17-year-old girl, and I never will be a 17-year-old girl. And I had no idea what she was going through, and yet I had to write about her because she was the character that needed to be there at the time. So,
that's why we have this thing called imagination.
yeah.
You feed the imagination with your experiences and everything you read. Or I think it's Truman Capote's famous quote, it's all material.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all grist for the mill.
Some of it's gristier than others, but that's life.
Sometimes it's good to surround yourself with colorful people. I will.
And sometimes it's good to look at the kind of ordinary people around you and say, so what's extraordinary about them? What's not, you know, but what is there? They obviously they must have something that makes them special to someone. But you know this book got started because I was with a group of people down in Rocky Point, and we were hanging out on the beach, you know, drinking beer and having a good time. And this little kid came along with a box full of with little souvenir, trinket type stuff, souvenirs that he was selling to the tourists who were on the beach. You know, and he, of course, he didn't speak English, but fortunately we had several people in the group that spoke Spanish, or native Spanish speakers, and so that, you know, they're having a little conversation, and he very earnestly, you know, put the box down and was, and that started this whole thing with, where does he go from here? What are his ideas? What are his dreams? If he became, and I took another character I had worked with years ago and never gone anywhere, said, what if he became this pilot, you know, of aircraft? How would that, you know, how would he get from here to there? What would be, you know, his challenges along the way? What would be his motivation? And that's how the whole story grew, was just a not very dynamic person that I met or that I encountered. And as you say, it's grist for the mill. It's all material. You pull it in and you figure out how to use it.
Something that surprised the heck out of me shortly after I started writing for self-publication, there was a gap when I stopped writing for a while because I wasn't making any progress, and this whole aspect of publishing the ebook directly came up, and I started again. Realized as I was creating characters, and particularly dialogue, I've gotten compliments for the reality of the dialogue. It sounds like real people talking, which it never occurred to me that I was doing it in particular. And when I started hearing it from readers, I'm thinking, okay, that's good, I've got something now. And it was literally writing one day, and I suddenly realized why. I spent a lot of years working retail. And I hated every freaking hour of it. And now, irony of ironies, I'm finding it's enormously useful because I talk to so many people. I can communicate with so many people in so many different ways.
What were you working in that I just...
Retail.
Okay, retail.
Retail.
I completely missed.
Yeah, it was in bookstores, pet stores, you know, all sorts of things like that, particularly in younger days. And to realize one day that this particular grist was the reason why I could make people sound like they were really talking to each other. It was literally sitting there with my hands on the keyboard thinking, wow, that's how that works. Oh, cool. Then I went right back in.
That's one of the things that I tell writers that I work with who are struggling with dialogue, where it's very stiff and very stilted, and the sentences are all long and grammatically correct and all that, which we know doesn't happen in the real world. I say, go eavesdrop at the grocery store or at Lowe's or wherever you happen to be out and about in the world. Listen to people talk.
I brought up Truman Capote briefly as one of, he said, got a book out there years ago called Music for Chameleons. That parts of it he's talking about writing and doing this. And one of the ways he got particularly adept at writing dialogue is he had to take a bus to the day job he had. And so he would sit there every day with a notebook in his lap. He'd listen to people. He'd write down what they were saying. Every now and then he'd get caught doing that. It was awkward. But he would go home and he'd study what he'd written and what kind of person had said it. And I realized that purely by accident I'd done something very similar without, just by enduring those terms of employment.
I shared the same thing. I worked in retail and hated every minute of it. Harlan Ellison did something very similar. One of his classes was, it's listen to everybody. Yes. He not even just going on the bus, but he would listen. He would watch the People's Court and just close his eyes and listen to people testify, because people speak differently under different circumstances. And retail, it's usually the dynamic. Yeah. I'm the customer voice. They immediately get into that role. So that's not really sincere, but if you listen to people in different situations, especially the people closest to you, you know that they're most gentle and confident, but then they get to the bar and then they start speaking different, and it becomes an education. It becomes fun. I think of dialogue as a form of music, in that everybody speaks with their own instrument, and that instrument changes, the way they play that instrument changes in the context, and you have to be mindful of that, because that will inform your character too. Are they quick to rage, and does that change the tone of their dialogue, their voice? That's. I think you're right. Retail is very influential in particularly those moments where you have to choose your words carefully. Yes, I will see to that right away. I'll take care of you.
You would get situations, bookstore comes to mind when I was working at bookstores. You would be dealing with customers who were buying books that they loved. And you'd hear that enthusiasm, you get really excited. And of course, I'm sitting behind the counter thinking, boy, I hope I write something that does that to somebody someday. Or the ones that, were seriously pissed off because you weren't going to give them a refund, or so that you get the whole range.
Or the customer comes in, do you have that book? I think it's blue.
Yeah.
Beautiful cover.
That actually happened.
Now, I had the benefit of being a news director for a radio station, so I had to talk nonstop. Okay, and I have a funny story if anybody wants to hear it about how I became famous as a news director, and it's not a good way. What I found most beneficial is I write all the dialogue first, and I tell the story completely. Now, mind you, I'll do it chapter by chapter, and then fill out the chapter by chapter, but I write all the dialogue out first, so just so you know, he says this, and she says this, and he says this, and maybe I have a little line in there, and this happens, and then this, and this, and this, and this, and I tell the story completely and all the character development through the dialogue. Then I stop, and I go back, and I put in the action words appropriate so that they're saying something in the middle of the action, so the story is progressing as well as it can and yet staying along with the plot. Now, onto the funny story. I had to go to a press conference, and I was running late, but I still had to make the 12 o'clock newscast. So I sat down and I pounded out the newscast at lightning speed, 30 seconds per page. Boom, pull it out, run back to the studio, record it, and at the very end was a little blurb on what the temperature was in some foreign location. And this time it was Bogota, okay? And so I just read through it, blah, 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 boom. Took the tape over to the DJs, ran out the door, headed to the Capitol. So I'm at the Capitol. I come back from the Capitol, okay, which was a nothing press conference, but I had to be there. And my office had a new banner in it that went all around the wall. It seems that when I read it off, I wasn't even paying attention to what I was saying, and so the temperature in Bogota, okay, that one thing. And so I come back and there's this banner, okay, nicely painted, and it says Bogota. So Bogota is pronounced Bogota. Yeah, Bogota, Bogota, not Bogode, is not long A, as in lame brain. I didn't get fired for it, but there you go. We got about 150 calls on that.
I wanted to ask you about your verisimilitude with your dialogue. The problem, the thing that I'm puzzling over is because a lot of people are kind of boring when they talk. Isn't it pretty bland and average? And then doesn't that sort of defeat the purpose of writing to make it more interesting and communicative? And I mean, you're doing something, right? That's doing right. But I'm just wondering about if we're really accurate about how people actually talk, would we really be creating interest? Or are you filtering it and making something that sounds like how people talk, but that you're sort of creating a very good illusion of how people talk?
In my case, it's mostly that I've learned how people project things when they feel certain ways and that sort of thing. Because I've never worked with anybody that's piloted a starship, and I have dialogue happening in such situations all the time. It's knowing when to use contractions, when to use pauses. It isn't the actual context of what those persons are saying there. It's what he was referring to, like music. I've learned to hear the songs by doing it, and I'm able to play with that information, with that experience.
You're picking up cadence, you're picking up habits and styles, and it seems credible, and you're probably making it more communicative and expressive than average, but you're getting the tone right and the cadence right, and
all of that morphing with the fact that I'm writing outrageous things, the things that could never possibly happen. But I'm trying to make it sound like real people are dealing with it.
There's also the conceit that you're telling a story through the dialogue and saying certain things that normal people wouldn't ever say. The trope of, as you know, Bill, it's necessary in some cases just to get the information out there. The Aaron Sorkin Walk and Talk is a great example of this, where an entire story is told in the hallway. And news people would never communicate. That would be an email or something, but they have to be dramatic about it. And most people aren't that way. We are boring, especially with sitcom talk in particular. It is well, no, it's not hyper-realistic. It is the opposite of hyper-realistic. It is going for the joke, set up, punchline. People don't talk that way, but it's a device, depending on your genre and your format, that makes it fit, and people just go, okay, I accept that. But if I'm writing a story set in Shakespeare's time, I'm not going to use that language. I'm not going to, if I have characters if I set a story in French, obviously I'm going to write English dialogue, and we will show up maybe once or twice.
Shakespeare doesn't reflect how people talk then at all.
Right, but if I'm writing in that context, if I'm telling a story in that period, or if I'm doing a Shakespearean type knockoff, if you will.
I think the main point is that your characters are not going to be talking like real people.
Right.
And if you're trying to make them sound like real people, you're going to have a boring book, and they're not going to convey any information. What you want to do is you want to convey information in the most artistic way possible without slapping somebody in the face with
it comes across like it's real.
Yeah, so that it comes across like it's real, but you are conveying the information in the most efficient way possible without making it sound like you're trying to convey information.
It has to sound natural, as though it feels natural coming out of that character's mouth, even though, as you say, real people may not be that forthcoming or that witty or what.
If you watch a Marvel movie, aliens don't speak that way. They speak like Tony Stark. They try to. It's that vernacular that you're used to because it's a Marvel movie and they all speak a certain way across the universe.
So would that more or less be, okay, this is a conversation that will almost assuredly never happen, however it would be possible?
It would be, well, in some cases possible, yeah.
Given the different laws of
I hate
physics.
I hate to put parameters on it like that, but you get, well, if you see the comedians who do impersonations, and they'll latch onto speech patterns that of whoever it is they're trying to impersonate. It's that kind of thing, not to that degree, but you catch the patterns of speech, you catch the kind of the flow of people around you, and you recognize that someone who grew up in East LA is going to have a different speech pattern than someone who grew up in Berkeley. It's that kind of thing. You have to kind of capture the essence, I guess, is what we're talking about here. It's you get the essence of the speech rather than.
You used a real good word for just a moment ago, making it sound natural.
Natural, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Bill, people talking, regardless of what the context of the story is.
Right.
So, I'm writing the first book of the Broken Throne. Okay, and this is all about dialogue. I'm writing the first book of the Broken Throne, and I'm doing what I do, which is I write out the dialogue and I fill in the action. And it is a solitary affair, and I'm just pounding away words all day, all night, nonstop, and Joanne is getting bored. So she laughs at this now, but it was infuriating at the time.
I'm proud of it now.
She started binge watching Jane Austen. Okay, in the other room. Okay, and I'm writing this, and I'm writing this, and I'm doing Kyrenae and the Countess Elna Del Mar. It's a son of a bitch. I'm writing Jane Austen. Well, I've started now, and it kind of works. Okay, I'll just keep on Jane Austen. Okay, honey, could you please watch something else other than Jane Austen? Okay, so I'm going to. So she turns it down real low. And who was the other guy you did?
Oscar Wilde.
She does Oscar Wilde. At this point, I'm doing Bergerac and Caroline. Okay, who were scoundrels. Okay. Okay, Bergerac and this, and they're having their banter back and forth. The son of a bitch, I'm running Oscar Wilde. Okay. And I had to banish her to the other room with the head down on, with the volume down on 2.
You can't stay here for
There's a reason that where my office space is as far from where the TV is set up in the house as possible. And even then, when I'm writing, I wear headphones and listen to music.
But we have 5 minutes left. Do you want to go through for last thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say we're getting to the end of our time, and you want to have last thoughts, or you want?
I've just given my last thoughts, so I'll let everybody else have those.
I think I've talked enough, but if you want to listen to any of my work, it's at jsmithaudio.com. There's hours of free stuff to download, and if you like what you hear, you can buy some of my books and help me pay off my student loan. Thank you.
Last thought that occurs to me is if you get the impression listening to these panels that this is sometimes a really messy business. You're right.
Absolutely.
There's people say I just write straight through and it's done. They're relying on the writers. It doesn't work that way. So.
Yeah, we were talking theoretically about getting to know your characters, but you see how easily it just drifted into other areas of writing because it's an integral process. You can't separate it into pieces. But if you'd like to hear another topic, tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock we'll be discussing saying something without being preachy. So we'll get into this whole dialogue thing.
And I would like to close out by posing the question, who would win in a steel cage match, Santa Claus or Sasquatch? Just because I always bring it around as Santa Claus and Sasquatch.
Depends on how you define win.
Well, the last panel I was on, none of us had anything to really say on the subject, so we just kept bringing it back to Santa Claus versus Sasquatch, But, thank you very much, everybody. Hi, Jazz.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Play and Podcast Network. If you enjoyed our show, please check out D&D Journey of the 5th Edition and Ragnarok Enroll a Scion Hero to Ragnarok Story. Also, check out our Patreon page for more content and behind-the-scenes things, as well as joining us for a one-shot game or two.